The sound of Wine's heels clicking against the shiny marble floors echoed loudly in the hallway as she struggled to keep up with Tim's long strides. He walked with the precision of a man on a mission, his hand tucked neatly into his pocket, his expression unreadable while Wine trailed behind like an overexcited puppy. "Mr. Kim, wait up," she called, her voice unnecessarily loud for the relatively quiet office. She glanced at the planner in her hand, flipping through pages with one hand while juggling a stack of files in the other. "You have a meeting with the board at 10, a lunch appointment with the investors at 1, and oh, don't forget your spa session tomorrow. Your skin is glowing lately, sir. Is it the cucumber mask I recommended?" Tim, without breaking his stride, clenched his jaw, kept walking, ignoring her cheerful commentary. As they passed the reception, Wine waved enthusiastically at the receptionist, nearly smacking her own files out of her grip. "Hey Lisa, good morning, your lipstick is popping today," she chirped, grinning. Lisa gave her a hesitant smile, clearly used to Wine's antics, while Tim sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Before they could move further, Wine suddenly stopped. "Mr. Chui," she yelled, addressing the elderly janitor who was mopping the floor. Tim halted mid-step, turning to see her crouching slightly to meet the old man's gaze. "How's the knee doing, Mr. Chui? Did the ointment work? How's your grandson? Did he win that saucer match?" she asked in rapid-fire succession, her tone filled with genuine concern. Mr. Chui chuckled, shaking his head. "You're too kind, Miss Wine. All good. Thank you." "Great." Wine clapped her hands, nearly dropping the files again. "Miss Wine," Tim's deep voice cut through the air, his tone sharp. "Are we running a community service program or are you actually doing your job?" Wine rolled her eyes, muttering grumpy as always, before skipping after him. "Why don't you smile more, Mr. Kim? You're handsome, but you would be devastatingly gorgeous if you smiled once in a while." Without waiting for his reaction, she grabbed his arm and started steering him toward the public elevator. "Stop dragging me," he said sternly, his brow twitching. "You need to mingle with the people, sir," Wine declared, loudly shoving him into the crowded elevator. "You and all the employees are ordinary people. With us mere mortals." Tim frowned, his broad shoulders stiffening as everyone in the elevator greeted him with polite bows. "Good morning, Mr. Kim," they murmured. He nodded quickly, his jaw tightening as Wine grinned at him and wedged herself in front of him like a self-appointed bodyguard. "Hey, Amelia," Wine called out, spotting her friend. "Saw your brother yesterday." "What a hunk. Is he single, asking for a friend?" "The friend is me." Amelia laughed, shaking her head. "Wine, are you hitting on my brother now?" "Well, someone has to. Handsome genes run in your family, Amelia. Share them." Wine joked, completely oblivious to Tim's dark glare burning into her back. As the elevator stopped at each floor, employees shuffled out one by one, leaving Tim looking increasingly agitated. When the elevator emptied, he stepped out abruptly. "I'm done. I will use my private elevator." "Mr. Kim," Wine called after him, but he didn't stop. "Wait, you are being such a diva." Tim halted and turned slightly, his cold gaze pinning her in place. "Your salary will be deducted." "What?" Wine shrieked, her files tumbling to the ground in a dramatic flutter. Her mouth hung open, her eyes wide in disbelief. "That's not fair. I have been nothing but dedicated to you, sir. I even complimented your skin." Tam walked ahead, clearly unimpressed. Clenching her fist, Wine threw them in the air, shaking them at the ceiling like a cheesy soap opera villain. "I'm cursed, cursed with an unreasonable boss." Tam stopped and turned around just as she composed herself, a wide grin plastered on her face. "I mean, I'll do better. No more mistakes, sir, I swear." She mimicked, swatting herself on the head for good measure. Tam's lips twitched as he pressed down a smile. "Good," he said coolly, turning back and walking away. Wine scrambled to gather the fallen files, sulking as she trailed behind him. "This is so unfair," she muttered under her breath, glaring daggers at his back. "I need a new job or a boss with a sense of humor." "I can hear you," Tam said without looking back. Wine froze before forcing another grin. "Just kidding, love working here, sir." Time skip. Wine leaned over the desk of her co-worker, arms flailing dramatically as she whined. "I'm telling you, that pig-headed tyrant is out to ruin me. Who makes their secretary work 12 hours a day and still says, 'Oh, your salary is deducted'?" She lowered her voice into a deep, gravely imitation of things. Miss Wine, your coffee is bitter. Miss Wine, you forgot to breathe properly today, so I'm deducting your salary. Her co-workers burst into laughter, covering their mouths to muffle the sound. Emboldened by their reaction, Wine puffed her chest and continued her tone, still mimicking him. Miss Wine, stop looking so happy. Smiling is a violation of company policy. Oh my god, one co-worker wheezed. You're going to get us all fired. What do you mean? Wine said, tossing her hair with mock arrogance. You'll never find out. The almighty Mr. Kim doesn't have ears in the walls. Does he? A low, unmistakable voice came from behind her. Big-headed tyrant. Almighty Mr. Kim, what else? Wine froze mid-laugh, her eyes wide as saucers. Slowly she shut her eyes, biting her lips like she would rewind time with sheer willpower. Her co-workers stared at her in horror, gaping like fish out of water. Summoning every ounce of courage and shamelessness she had, One plastered on the brightest smile she could manage and turned around. Oh, Mr. Kim, what a surprise. She pointed dramatically at her co-workers. They said it. I mean, how could I? You're the best boss. I would never call you names. Tim raised a single unimpressed eyebrow. Really? Yes, sir. Wine nodded furiously, sending her ponytail bobbing. She threw her co-workers a pleading look, but they only stared at her in betrayal. Tim crossed his arms. I have been calling you for the past 15 minutes, but you seem very busy with important matters. Wine's brain scrambled for an excuse. Oh, I went to the bathroom, but as I was passing, I heard them saying those things about you, so I had to defend you. She patted his shoulder with exaggerated concern. Sir, you shouldn't be so grumpy. People might start hating you. The room went deadly silent. Tim's glare could have frozen fire. Realizing her mistake, Wine gave a nervous laugh, miming zipping her mouth. I'll just shut up now. Tim walked to his office while Wine followed behind. Inside his office, he sat down at his desk picking up his coffee. This is bitter. Didn't you add sugar? Wine raised her brows, muttering under her breath. Not as bitter as your mouth. She laughed nervously when Tim's glare snapped at her. I mean impossible, I added sugar. She grabbed the mug from his hand, taking a sip before gasping. See, perfect. I would make an amazing barista. Tim leaned back in his chair, his voice dripping sarcasm. How professional of you to taste your boss coffee. Wine froze, her face turning red. Oh, my bad. I didn't mean to. I'll make you a fresh cup. No need, Tim said dryly. Focus on the board meeting. It's in 5 minutes. Wine's eyes bulged. What? She snatched his wrist to check the time on his watch, then bolted out of the office yelling, Why didn't you tell me earlier? I'm not prepared. As soon as she disappeared, Tim let out a real laugh, taking another sip of the coffee. Now it tastes much better. After a few minutes, everyone was seated, waiting for Tim, who sat at the head of the table with his usual icy demeanor. The room was dead silent when the door burst open and Wine stumbled in, panting heavily. I'm so sorry, she announced loudly, clutching the file to her chest. I'm late because my boss is cruel and overworks me. All eyes started to Tim, whose cold gaze remained fixed on Wine. The corner of several mouths twitched, desperate to suppress laughter. Wine, oblivious, walked over to Tim, slamming the file on the table with a fake, overly sweet smile. Here you go, sir. In her haste, she accidentally knocked over a glass of water, drenching the papers. Oh, come on, she groaned, putting her hands on her hips. Sir, please don't stare at me like that. I know I'm late. Everyone suppressed their laughter, knowing well only Wine was the one who could get on Tim's nose. Tim stared at her, his expression blank, though his lips twitched slightly. Start the meeting, he said sternly, his voice strained as if holding back laughter. Wine sighed, muttering under her breath, You're lucky you're handsome, Mr. Grumpy. Tim's lips curved ever so slightly upward, but he quickly covered it with his hand, gesturing for her to sit. Lunchtime. The elegant restaurant hummed softly with conversations as Wine and Tim walked in together. Tim's sharp suit and Wine's simple but stylish outfit drew several pairs of eyes. They approached a table where Dawson, a middle-aged businessman with a confident smile, stood to greet them. Dawson greeted, shaking his hand firmly before turning to Wine. And who is this beautiful lady? This is my secretary. Tim replied curtly, but his hands swiftly found Wine's free one, interlocking their fingers in a firm possessive grip. Wine blinked at the unexpected gesture, but before she could say anything, Tim guided her to her chair. "Let's get straight to business," he said, his voice as cool as ever. Dawson's smile faltered slightly, but he nodded and sat down. The conversation quickly shifted to business, with Wine diligently taking notes while the two men discussed deals, projections, and strategies. The waiter approached and served their lunch, placing an array of delicious dishes on the table. Wine's eyes shimmered as she admired the beautifully plated food. Then glanced at her reaction and without a word began filling her plate. "Eat," he said, his tone still flat, though his actions spoke of subtle care. Wine picked up her fork and took a bite, her eyes fluttering shut as she let out a soft, satisfied moan. "Oh my God, this is so good," she said, her voice filled with delight. She turned to Theo, her excitement childlike. "You have to try this, it's amazing." Before she realized what she was doing, she picked up a morsel with her fork and held it out to him. Theo blinked at her sudden action but leaned forward, taking the bite. He nodded, chewing thoughtfully. "It's decent," he said, though his lips curved slightly upward. Dawson chuckled, watching their interaction. "You're lucky to have such a caring secretary, Mr. Kim. If she ever considers switching jobs, I would love to have her on my team." Wine choked on her drink, coughing violently. Then immediately handed her a glass of water, his eyes narrowing at Dawson. "She's not available," he said coldly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Dawson held up his hands in mock surrender. "Understood." The rest of the meal continued in silence, the tension palpable as Tham's icy demeanor discouraged any further remarks from Dawson. After finishing their meal, they walked out. Wine broke the silence. "That went well, right?" Tham glanced at her and without preamble said, "You're not attending meetings like this again." Wine frowned, stopping in her tracks. "Why not?" "And no more makeup," he added, ignoring her question. Her jaw dropped. "Excuse me, why?" Tham hesitated for a split second before muttering, "Because all men try to hit on you and I don't like it." Wine blinked, her lips curving into a teasing smirk. "Wait, are you jealous, Mr. Kim?" He stiffened, blinking rapidly before clearing his throat. "Jealous? Don't be ridiculous. You're my secretary, and they all want you to join their companies. I can't afford to lose a good secretary." Wine rolled her eyes, crossing her arms. "Relax, boss. I wouldn't leave this job, even if my boss is grumpy, cold, and a pig-head. He's still better looking than those bad uncles." Tham's lips twitched, but he composed himself. "I heard that." She turned to glare at him, stepping closer and grabbing his collar. "I didn't say anything bad about you. Why are you so arrogant?" Unknowingly, she leaned in, their faces nearly inches apart. Tham's hand came up to gently hold her wrist, his dark eyes fixed on hers. Before she could process what was happening, someone bumped into her from behind, causing her to stumble forward, pressing into his chest. Her breath hissed as their faces were now impossibly close. She immediately let go of his collar, but Tham's hand slid down to fold hers firmly. "Why are you so flustered, Miss Wine?" he asked, his deep voice laced with amusement, a smirk tugging at his lips. Her heart pounded violently, her cheeks heating up as she looked away. Let go, Mr. Kim," she mumbled. Instead, he pulled her closer, his gaze softened. "Weren't you bold enough to grab my collar and call me arrogant just now? What happened to that confidence?" Her eyes darted to his, wide with surprise. "What's wrong with you, Mr. Kim?" His smirk deepened as his thumb lightly brushed her knuckles. "Nothing at all." When he finally smiled, a rare, breathtaking sight, her heart skipped a beat. She gasped, pointing at him. "You smiled. Oh my God, you actually smiled." He immediately let go of her hand, his composure returning as he noticed the curious stares from people around them. Wine, however, wasn't done teasing. "Are you shy, Mr. Kim?" His cold glare returned, but it only made her giggle. Her bright laugh seemed to fill the air around them, and despite himself, Tham's heart swelled at the sight of her. "Let's go," he muttered, brushing past her. Still giggling, Wine followed behind, her heart fluttering in ways she couldn't quite explain. Few days later, it was a quiet weekend morning, too quiet, Wine thought as she stretched and made her way to the living room. The peace didn't last long though, as the familiar sound of her parents yelling filled the air. Her mother's sharp voice cut through the room. "You are impossible. Why do I always have to clean up after your mess?" Her father snapped back, his tone just as angry. And you're so perfect, aren't you? All you ever do is complain. One sighed deeply and the day another argument. She stepped into the living room, her presence immediately noticed by her mother. Oh, look who's finally awake, her mother said sarcastically, crossing her arms. The queen herself has graced us with her presence. Wine ignored the jab, walking toward the couch. Her mother continued, her voice sharp. I have set you up on another blind date. Why do you keep avoiding them? Do you plan to stay single forever? Wine froze, her expression unusually serious. That person is a mama's boy, she said, firmly meeting her mother's gaze. I'm not going to ruin my life by marrying someone like that. Her mother's face turned red with anger. You're so ungrateful. You are a completely unfilial daughter. You don't listen. You don't respect us. I am respectful. Wine shot back, her voice rising for the first time. But respect goes both ways. You are the one trying to push me into something I don't want. Before her mother could respond, her father slammed his hand on the table, his voice booming. Enough, I can't have a moment of peace in this house. Her mother turned on him, her voice venomous. Don't you dare blame me, this is all her fault. We're only holding on to this sham of a relationship because of her. If it weren't for her, no one would have to suffer. One stood there, her heart pounding in her chest, her hands clenched into fists, and her voice shook as she finally snapped. I never asked you to have me, she shouted, her voice trembling with emotion. If you're staying together because of me, then you have done a terrible job showing it. Don't use me as your excuse for being miserable. I have been hearing the same line since I was a kid. Her parents stared at her, stunned into silence. I can take care of myself. Wine continued, tears streaming down her face. I don't need your shelter, your food, or your money. So stop pretending like this is all for me. Her father stood, his expression softening. Wine, he began, his voice unsteady, but her mother cut in sharply. How dare you speak to us like this? We are your parents. Wine let out a bitter laugh, her sobs growing harder. Even now, all you care about is yourself. You have never cared about my feelings, not once. I'm done, okay, I can't stay here anymore. Without waiting for a response, she turned and ran out of the house, her vision blurred with tears. Her father snapped at her mother. Do you see what you have done now? You'll never know when to stop. Wine didn't hear any of it. She kept running, the cold air biting at her skin as she dashed down the streets. She didn't stop until she was far away, her breathing heavy and her legs burning. She wandered aimlessly through the streets, her thoughts a tangled mess. The cool wind brushed against her tear-streaked face as she walked past a bustling restaurant. The lively chatter inside was drowned out by the storm in her heart until she heard a familiar voice. Wine, she stopped in her tracks, her body stiff as she slowly turned around. Her blank gaze met Thames' worried eyes. He was standing just outside the restaurant, his sharp suit slightly crumpled, his expression ached with concern. Wine, what happened? He asked, quickly approaching her and gripping her shoulders gently. For a moment she just stared at him, her lips parting slightly but no words coming out. Then she shook her head weakly as if trying to dismiss everything. Thames' brow furrowed and without another word he led her toward his car. Come with me, he said softly, his tone leaving no room for argument. He opened the car door, helping her in before dismissing the driver with a brief gesturing. Sliding into the back seat, he turned toward her, his gaze never leaving her face. Speak up, Wine, what's wrong? At his words, her composure shattered, her shoulders trembled as tears spilled over her cheeks. She lowered her head, her sobs quiet but heartbreaking. Thames' heart ached at the sight. Without hesitation, he reached out, held her hand, his thumb brushing soothing circles over her knuckles. Why doesn't my parents understand me? She finally whispered between sobs. It feels like I'm just a mistake to them. Her words were laced with years of bottled pain, each syllable cutting deeper into Thames' chest. Ever since I can remember, she continued, her voice shaking. They have been like this, always fighting, always blaming me, and now they want me to go on these stupid blind dates. I just can't do it anymore. Her forehead dropped onto his hand as she choked out. I don't want to live with them anymore. Then clenched his jaw, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. Slowly he lifted his free hand and ran it gently through her hair, his touch comforting. You don't have to, he said softly. You can live with me forever. Wine's head shot up, her tear-streaked face filled with shock. What? She exclaimed. and then grabbed his arm. Them couldn't help but chuckle softly, watching as she wiped her tears and then nose on his sleeve. He pressed his lips together to suppress a smile, but her wide-eyed realization made it impossible. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." Vine squeaked, quickly grabbing tissues and dabbing it at his sleeve. "It's fine," Thane assured, his hand closing over hers to stop her frantic movements. His gaze softened. Vine blinked, her cheeks still wet. "But how can I live with you? That's so inappropriate. You're my boss." A smile tugged at Thane's lips. "I don't want you to live with me as my secretary, Vine. I want you to live with me as my wife." He wiped her face. Her jaw dropped and she stared at him, eyes wide with disbelief. "What?" she gasped, almost yelling. Thane chuckled, pleased to see the life returning to her expression. "My mom happened to set me up on a blind date too," he explained casually. "But I would rather marry you. I like you, Vine." For a moment, Vine just stared at him, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to process his words. Finally, she reached out and touched his forehead. "Are you sick? Do you have a fever?" Thane laughed, a deep, genuine sound that made her heart skip. "Why is it so hard to believe?" She scratched her neck awkwardly. "It's just, you're almost perfect. It's hard to believe someone like you would like someone like me." His expression softened further and he reached out to pat her head gently. "Don't say that, you're perfect, Vine. Any man would be lucky to have you." Vine swallowed hard, her cheeks heating up as her heart raced for the first time in his presence. She cleared her throat awkwardly. "But my parents will handle them later," they interrupted smoothly. "For now, we'll have a court marriage today. And from now on, you'll live with me. I'll give you the best wedding later, I promise. But right now, let's escape all the blind dates and all this pain." Vine hesitated, her gaze flickering between his sincere eyes and their intertwined hands. She slowly nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Okay." Thane smiled, a rare, breathtaking smile that made her heart skip again. Without another word, he leaned closer and kissed her forehead. "You won't regret this, Vine," he murmured. Her heart pounded as she closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his words and his presence wash over her. At night, the quiet hum of the night wrapped around the mansion as Vine walked in the hallway. She had changed into comfortable clothes, her damp hair cascading down her shoulders. The soft aroma of spices wafting through the air led her to the kitchen. Stopping at the doorway, her eyes widened at the sight before her. Thane, dressed in a casual white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, was focused on the stove, a spatula in one hand as he stirred something in a pan. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and the subtle glow of the kitchen light accentuated his sharp features. She leaned against the counter, her gaze fixed on him, unable to look away. "I didn't know you could cook," she said softly, her voice breaking the quiet. Thane turned his head, a rare soft smile gracing his lips. "You should have rested. It's been a long day." Vine shook her head, pushing herself off the counter. The aroma of food was too good to ignore. Thane chuckled, a sound so warm it made her heart flutter. But as he resumed his work, her lips parted slightly in disbelief. "It's hard to believe you're the same grumpy cold boss I used to know." Thane froze mid-motion, placing the spatula down before turning toward her. His expression shifted, his usual stoicism replaced with something more intense. In two strides, he was standing before her, pinning her gently against the counter as his hands rested on either side of her. Vine's breath hedged, her body stiffening. For the first time, she felt genuinely nervous in his presence. His deep gaze locked onto hers as he leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a low murmur. "I'm not your boss anymore," he said, his tone laced with something tender and possessive. "I'm your husband now." Her heart raced as he wrapped his hands around her waist and effortlessly lifted her onto the counter. She swallowed hard, her legs dangling as she nervously clutched the edge of the slab. "Mr. Kim," he placed his finger on her lips. "It's Thane." "Thane," she murmured, avoiding his piercing gaze. "Are you pitying me?" The question made him pause. Slowly he reached up and cupped her face, his thumbs gently brushing her cheeks. Then he leaned in and placed a soft kiss on her forehead, lingering there for a moment before pulling back. I genuinely like you, he said firmly, his eyes filled with sincerity. Her lips parted in surprise, her voice barely audible. Why? Thames' lips curved into a faint smirk as he tilted his head slightly. From the first day I saw you, she blinked. What? Why? The day you spilled coffee on me, he said, his smirk growing into a small grin, and refused to admit your mistake. You even threatened me, saying you were the fiancé of the boss. Wine gasped, covering her mouth as she burst into a laugh. Oh God, that was so embarrassing. I didn't know you were the boss. Then chuckled, watching her laugh with an intensity that made her laughter falter. She grew quiet under his gaze, her cheeks flushing as she bit her lip nervously. Why are you looking at me like that? She mumbled, trying to break the tension. You are beautiful, he replied simply, his tone unwavering. Her heart skipped a beat and she quickly cleared her throat, trying to regain her composure. I'll still keep my job, she stammered, her eyes darting away. And we won't reveal our marriage to anyone at work. Theo noted, a glimmer of amusement in his eyes at her flustered state. Agreed, but tomorrow we'll inform my mom, and soon we'll visit my parents. Vine's eyes widened, her nervousness returning in full force. Meet your parents. Theo placed a reassuring hand on her knee, his touch warm and grounding. I'll be with you, he said softly. Don't worry, I'll handle everything. Her lips trembled as she gave a small nod, his words slowly easing her anxiety. His thumb brushed her knee comfortingly before he added, From today onwards, your grief, your troubles, and your pain are mine. Her chest tightened at his words, a shy smile spreading across her face as she lowered her gaze. Tim grinned at her reaction, leaning closer. Why are you smiling like that? Shy, Mrs. King. She flushed, sweating his arm lightly. Don't call me that. Why not? You are my wife now. He teased, his grin widening. I lowered her gaze, biting her lip. He looked at her face. Stop biting your lips. Leave that to me, he said in a low tone, and held both her hands in one of his, and used his other hand to gently cup her chin, making her look at him. Wine leaned and pressed her forehead against his shoulder, trying to hide her face. Theo chuckled, leaning in closer, his lips brushing against her ear as he whispered, Get used to it, Mrs. King. Her heart raced as he pulled back, a mischief gleamed in his eyes. Time skip. Theo sat on the edge of the bed, his bow tie loosened and the top buttons of his shirt undone, revealing a glimpse of his toned chest. His eyes flickered to the door as it opened, and Vine stepped in, yawning dramatically. It was such a long day, she mumbled, stretching her arms above her head. Theo raised an eyebrow, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Long enough, Mrs. King, especially since you have been standing outside with the elderly neighbors for the past 25 minutes, abandoning your groom. Vine stopped mid-stretch, her eyes widening as a nervous laugh escaped her lips. I just wanted to ask how they were doing. It's polite, you know. Theo leaned back against the headboard, his gaze sharp but playful. You're cruel, Mrs. King. Do you know how much you tortured me tonight? Joe dropped in disbelief. I'm cruel? She exclaimed, pointing to herself. Instead of answering, Theo closed his eyes and leaned back, his lips twitching into a faint smirk. Vine stared at him, dumbfounded. Before sitting beside him on the bed, she leaned over and called his name softly. Theo, he didn't respond. She pouted, her voice softening as she tried again. Theo, are you still mad at me? Still silence. Letting out a frustrated huff, Vine stormed to the bathroom. Minutes later, she emerged, her jewelry and makeup removed, her body wrapped in loose cotton pajamas. She climbed into the bed, settling her head against his shoulder. Her voice was small, almost trembling. Are you mad at me? Theo remained quiet, his steady breathing only adding to her guilt. Vine's fingers clutched at his shirt as her voice wavered. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you angry. Her soft sniffle made his eyes snap open. In one swift motion, Theo turned his head to look at her, his expression alarmed. Vine, I'm not mad. She pushed herself up on her elbows, leaning closer to him with wide, questioning eyes. Then why didn't you respond earlier when I said I'd change? His lips curved into a mischief smile. Because I thought you loved that gown too much and I was scared I would end up tearing it apart tonight. Vine's cheeks flushed a deep crimson as she gasped, smacking his chest lightly. Shut up, Theo. He let out a rich, throaty laugh, pulling her closer by the waist. His laughter softened into a warm smile as he reached over to grab a small box from the nightstand. He handed it to her, his fingers brushing against hers. This is for you, he said softly, leaning in to press a tender kiss to her cheek. Vine's lips parted in surprise as she opened the box, revealing a delicate bracelet with tiny charms. Her eyes shimmered with emotion as she looked up to him. She thanked him. Thank you. Keep it there. I'll wear it tomorrow. Tham's expression turned serious. Are you sure you don't want to inform your parents? He asked, his voice low. Your father has come to the company several times. Her smile faltered as she shook her head and laid back, resting her head on his shoulder. What's the point of coming now? It doesn't change anything. Even now they are not apart. They are just trying to make amends for each other. It feels like all they ever wanted was to drive me away. Tham's jaw tightened as he propped up and brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. Then forget about them, he murmured, his voice soothing. Vine nodded, letting out a small sigh. Her fingers squeezed up to cup the side of his neck, her touch gentle and grateful. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for treating me so well, for making me feel wanted and worth it. Her lips brushed against his forehead, then his chin, her kisses feather-light and filled with gratitude. Thank you for giving me a family I never thought I would have, she added softly. Tham's heart swelled as he leaned down, pressing his lips to hers in a soft yet firm kiss. You deserve it all, Vine, he whispered against her lips, his voice husky. His lips trailed down to her jaw, then to her ear as he murmured teasingly, but don't think I'll let you off that easily tonight. His teeth gently grazed her earlobe, making her squeal as she playfully swatted his arm. Tham, he grinned, his hands finding her waist as he pulled her closer. What? He teased, his voice laced with mischief. You are a pervert. She muttered, though her lips curved into a smile. Only for you, he said with a smile before capturing her lips again. This time, the kiss was deeper, more passionate, leaving them both breathless. His hands slid up to cradle the back of her head, deepening the kiss. When they finally put apart, Vine's cheeks were flushed, her breath coming in short bursts. Then smiled at her dazed expression, his thumb brushing against her bottom lip. I love you, Mrs. Kim, he murmured, his tone teasing yet filled with affection. Vine rolled her eyes, but the small shy smile on her lips betrayed her true feelings. I love you too, Mr. Kim.